Alright, I'm giving you a quick overview on how to go about creating the code for this program. This is going to be your grade program. So first off, make sure you have your information up here. We want to make sure that I know who am I grading. And let's look at some of the objectives and the requirements for this particular project here. So overall, you're going to basically prompt the user to input 3 scores. You're going to calculate the score, you're going to determine what the average, and then basically provide a letter grade. So that's fairly easy. Look at the code requirements. So you're going to write your code underneath the DEF message. So once again, this is the structure that we are utilizing, and as we go through a couple more courses, probably around midterm, we'll get into how functions and what the purpose of a function is. So that's why I have things structured this way for these types of projects. So you want to make sure that everything is indented. And let's see, you're going to use the appropriate variable names for the input. So I also kind of highlighted things out of what you need to put in each section. Obviously, you need more lines. You're going to add more lines as you need to. Calculate the average of the scores. And save it as a variable, because you're going to utilize that average in terms of finding the letter grade. So we're going to utilize a if-else and if-elif-else statement to determine the letter grade. Do not utilize a nested if statements for this. It's just it does work, but it's just more work for you to do. You're going to output the grades entered, the total amount of points, the average, and then the letter grade that they received. And the thing is here, once you do your calculation here, when you're doing the letter grade received here, this is where you're going to be utilizing the if, elif, and else statements in that particular area. Now the grading here is based on rubric, so once you are done with this, you're going to basically say that you have completed it, and then you are going to write completed in the rubric. Now I also have a couple tips and tricks associated here. Like I've mentioned earlier, this is going to possibly require a flowchart or do some kind of pseudocode. Because if you start coding things right away, I pretty much could guarantee you that you're going to spend a lot more time trying to figure out what to write in the code here than basically writing out on a piece of paper a flowchart or the pseudocode. Again, don't use a nested if statements. And this is kind of a snippet of code in terms of how would you determine the letter grade and the output, or determine that and then generate the output. So basically in total, this is not going to take you more than basically 30 lines of code, more or less, depending on how many additional comments and extra spaces that you might have on that part. And this would be kind of like the sample output. So you're going to basically prompt the user to input the score, output what the scores are, determine the total score, what the average score is, and then the letter grade. So this is going to be based on the straight 90, 80, 70, 60. Before I do that, let's take a look at the output of the program and how the program should work. So as we see, we're starting out with input a test score. So we'll do, let's see, 88, we'll do 92 and 100. It outputs the information, calculates what the total amount of score is, and then basically determines the average and then the letter grade. Now let me jump back into the project where we have the challenge code. So the challenge code is going to be this. We're just enhancing the environment a bit. So we're still going to prompt the user to enter the 3 test scores, but each of the scores is going to have a different point value. Max points are going to be displayed in a moment here when I go through the program there. The user is going to enter those points displayed. You're going to basically display the score that was entered, the max amount of points for that test, and then you're going to figure out the percentage for that particular test score. And then once again, you're going to utilize a straight 90, 80, 70, 60 for the letter grade scale. Now, it's almost going to work the same. You're going to add a couple extra lines of code to it. The thing is, when you're figuring out what the letter grade is, this is not based out of 100 points. It's different. So that means that you cannot use the average score to determine the letter grade, because it's not, all the points are not basically equal. So you need to get a final grade percentage from the 3 test scores and utilize that to determine the actual letter grade. So when it comes down to it, this is how it would work. So let me jump back to the program and show you how that works. All right, for the challenge code, you're going to be making some changes from how the original code would have been written to the challenge code. So you have just a different set of parameters and criteria for it. So when the student needs to enter these test score for 1, we have a maximum of 50 points. So let's say we had 45 here. Second score was 18, and the third score, let's say it was 11. So we're dealing here with basically different percentages, different scores in total on that part. So back above here, we had everything was based out of 100, so it was easier to figure out, you know, the math and everything else. So this one requires just a little bit more math in terms of how to do the calculations. When we get the output, you notice that we have the score that was entered out of X amount of points, and then we determine the percentage. So each of these outputs is going to have a little bit more calculations involved. And now one thing that you see that I didn't comment out in my code, and I just want to kind of bring this to light. So as you're going through and troubleshooting the syntax and the code, what I did here with this particular line is I created a line so it outputs the information. That's why I had you guys learn the data types of the different items, and then, you know, how to print out the output. This is basically a check or a test for me to identify how the calculations are being done. And you notice that when it did the basically the total points percentage, this is in long format, and when I basically did is shorten it up so we have a whole number versus a dotted decimal, and you can see that that is a type float on that part. So those are kind of another little hint in that part. And then when you display the total output in terms of that, so this is basically, from my numbers, 74 points out of 95 points total. So that's basically 77%. Average points here is going to be 24 based on these values that we've entered there. And this is going to be a grade level or letter grade of C, because 77 would be in that 90, 80, 70, 60. So that'd be a C. So that's, you know, another thing to kind of keep in mind in terms of when you're doing coding, is to output certain things just to see if everything is working the way you thought it was. And that's pretty much it for the challenge code. So this challenge code here would be an updated or enhanced version of what basically is required. And if I jump back to the objectives here, challenge code ++ is to make the output a little bit better looking. That may include, you know, better titles, better headings, more line spaces in between, and possibly utilizing some color. But again, this is nothing significantly important. You got to make sure that you get at least the basics down before you start doing anything super fancy with that. So that is how this particular code would work.